Well, hey folks, I'm Josh. Welcome back to the shop. Today, I want to try something. I've had a couple of people, actually more than a couple, several, ask how would you go about making the small blade on a Swiss Army knife into more of a whittling blade shape without access to a grinder? Because I made a video of reshaping that, making it better for whittling, at least in my opinion, putting a nice straight edge on there, as opposed to the factory geometry, which is like a spear point. So we take it from this kind of an edge to more of a, or shape, I guess I should say, to more of a straight shape like that. So spear point to straight. And honestly, the easiest way to do that is if you have access to a rotating whetstone, a grinder, a half-speed grinder, a belt sander. Shoot, you could even, with a Dremel tool, if you're really careful and make sure that you don't overheat the blade and put some water on there as you go, you could use a cutoff wheel and cut a straight line across with a Dremel. All kinds of things like that. But let's just say you do not have access to any kinds of power tools and you want to do this completely by hand. What method, what could you do to get prepared to put that edge on there? So you could use your whetstones if you have whetstones. My fear would be that you would create like a worn out spot in your whetstone, which I don't really think you probably want to do. So you probably want to stay away from your whetstone. This is a pretty fairly hard steel. It's not super hard, but it's fairly hard. And we're going to be grinding off a fair amount. So I don't really recommend going to your whetstones right away, unless your type of, by whetstone, you mean a diamond plate. So this is an extra coarse diamond plate that, this thing grinds fast. It's practically a file. It goes pretty quick. And I don't really have to worry about wearing it out so much. I mean, it will eventually wear out, and it'll be not exactly an extra coarse stone anymore. It'll get to be more of a coarse stone. But this would be a great choice, except these are expensive. And if you don't have one of these, then you can't use one, because you're not going to just buy one just to reshape one blade. That would be silly. So if you don't have access to power tools, you don't got a buddy that's got something that could do this, and you don't have a big honking diamond plate like this, first of all, you should map out your line. So the line that you want, that I like to put on these for where you want to go, is you draw a line from the very tip down here to the very tip up here. So I just line up with a ruler, straight edge, piece of wood, whatever you got, and a Sharpie, and just draw a line, because it kind of helps you know where you're going. And you want to stop short of that in this process. You don't want to go all the way to that line until you're ready to start sharpening. On both sides, yes, they're not probably perfectly lined up, but that's okay. We're just trying to get a rough idea of where we're going. So we need to remove the metal up here. Get yourself some wet dry sandpaper. Get a flat surface to put it on. Get it wet. A little bit of water. And start going to town. Now, does this need to be perfectly flat? No, it does not need to be perfectly flat. We are not at the sharpening phase. We're not putting an edge on this yet. We're just removing metal. So if it's got a little bit of a curve to it or a warp or whatever, I don't care. It doesn't matter. This is really not pivotal at this stage. When you get to the sharpening stage, being flat is going to matter more. But even then, there's room for error. So you don't have to have like a fancy granite plate for this, for lapping or anything crazy like that. You just get some wet dry sandpaper. Now this is 220 grit. It's just what I have laying around. I don't even know. I'm sure you can probably find a more coarse wet dry. If you could get to like 100 or an 80, it would make this process go faster. But 220 will do it. It's just going to take a little bit. So it would probably be good to secure this paper onto the board. But I don't think we're going to have to. I think this is going to work. If you wanted, you could spray some spray adhesive on there and then tack that down, or you could clamp it down, or I don't know, whatever. But I'm not expecting this to take long enough to really care. You can already see we're making progress. And you notice I'm not going straight down. If you go straight down, it sounds terrible. So you can go straight down, but I can't handle it. So I go at a little bit of an angle. It makes me feel better. Getting pretty close. And you can tell my sandpaper's wearing out a little bit. I've worn it off a little bit right there. It seems still pretty good right here, so I'm going to keep working there. If you wear out your sandpaper, just cut a piece off, scoot it forward, keep going. It's really not a big deal. You'll also notice I'm wearing gloves. I don't really like getting this swarf from this on my hands. That way I don't have to worry about washing my hands. You don't have to wear gloves necessarily. I don't like. I'm going to try to keep my hands clean. So, we don't got too far left. So let's get a fresh piece of paper here. The thing you got to watch out for as you're doing this is how straight are you going. You know, you're starting out with a bellied blade, and you got more material to remove in this area than you do on either the tip or closer to the heel here. So just kind of watch where you're putting more pressure and how you're angling the knife so that you're getting closer to that line as you go and approaching it flat. You don't want to remove more material on either the tip or back here than you need to, because then you're going to end up with less blade to work with. So just think about that and kind of watch as you go. Where do you need to focus on putting pressure and kind of applying so that it takes it off in the places you need it to. Alright, so as you get down to the last little bit here, now you got to start worrying about whether or not what you're grinding on is flat. If you really want to get a good straight flat edge, you need something pretty flat. Now, I'm doing this on top of some, what is this, MDF, press board, whatever. Melamine, I guess, technically is what that is. That I know is pretty good and flat, because the surface of this, these are almost always really flat. Yeah, you can see, there's no daylight under that ruler. So that's flat enough. Flat enough for me. If you don't have something good and flat like this, you could move to your stones at this point just to do the final flattening, just to get that nice flat blade. But I'm pretty much there. So now I'm just going to do just a little bit of initial sharpening before I move to my sharpening stones, because this is, I don't know, I'm already here. Why not? All right, to the stones. So now that I've got the edge good and flat, or good and straight, really. It's really time to move to sharpening stones. Now, at this point, you move to whatever your sharpening system is. If you're a sandpaper guy, move to the sandpaper that you use to sharpen. If you have diamond stones, use those. Whatever, a work sharp, I don't know. Whatever your thing is, you do that. I like to use diamond plates. It's what I have. I'll start with a coarse one, and then I'll move to fine, and then extra fine, and then I will finish up on a strop with some polishing compound to put a nice polished, smooth edge on there. And I prefer a convex edge on my whittling blades, at least my small ones like this. And I actually did a video comparing a convex versus a micro bevel. If you want to check that out, I'll put a link in here. But anyway, this is where you start to put that edge on there. And I'm really not going to go into super detail about sharpening, but I guess I could do that in another video. That's just not the focus of this one. But we're just going to put an edge on this guy, and then we'll go to town. Alright, so there she is, all sharpened up, and there's still a few scuffs on the blade, but that's really not a big deal in my opinion. The edge itself is sharp, so here's a hunk of basswood, and you can see we're getting nice smooth cuts in that. It's moving through as I would expect it to. So, worked out. So anyway, you don't have to have a grinder to put that kind of an edge on the knife. You do need some sharpening stones of some type, and some wet dry sandpaper is enough to do it. You know, lots of different things you could use, but it's really not all that hard. That took me, I don't know, 20, maybe 30 minutes tops, including the polishing. So that's really not that bad. You know, if you have a grinder, you could do it in, I don't know, 5 minutes. But the point is, it can be done. Sandpaper is really cheap. You can go pick up a piece of wet dry sandpaper. That was $2.20 grit for a very reasonable price, and you won't even use the whole sheet. I used about a half of one, and I was probably a little generous with the water. But anyway, that's how I would sharpen up a Swiss Army knife for whittling without the use of a grinder. If you're working with limited tools, sometimes it's nice to see how somebody would do something on the cheap. One thing I should mention is after you do all that, it gets a little gunky down here in the knife, so you probably want to make sure that you go clean it out really good after this, and then give it another good little bit of oil in there so that your tools don't get all gummed up and grind away with all that the swarf and stuff from the sharpening. So make sure you clean your knife up when you're done, and then you're pretty much good to go. Hope this was useful. Let me know if you have questions. Reach out, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I hope you have a good one. We'll see you next time.